Hey guys, what's up? This is Rocky Days, and in this video, I'll be talking about frameworks and libraries and how they are different and how you would want to use one thing over the other depending on what you're working with. So, coming to frameworks, let's just talk about the pros and cons first. So, let's say pros and cons on both sides at once. So, when you are working with a framework like AngularJS or React.js, what happens is that you don't have to do much research and development because everything is laid out for you right ahead, and you don't require to go ahead and get things functioning because you would require just the framework to work. But if at all you're using a library, it would require a lot of research and development because the library is itself small at a lot of times, and uh, there are other mini libraries or other libraries which depend on this library, the primary one, which will provide additional functionality. So a library example would be jQuery, which we have seen a lot of times, has a lot of mini libraries or jQuery extensions. So even though AngularJS has its own extensions, those are pretty small, like very they are like not required a lot of times. They just extend the functionality. But coming back to libraries, you might want to use a lot of them. So this is a very primary difference between frameworks and libraries. Also, when you're working with frameworks, there is something called code quality. When you're working with programming, there is something called code quality. So code quality is generally better in frameworks because everything is laid out to you. It is specified that you need to use certain things in certain ways. So the prescribed practices are given right away. But when you're working with the library, the what happens is that you don't have any restrictions put upon you, so because of which you can either write very good code or an average code or bad code. So there's a problem which is faced by people who just use libraries like jQuery and do not use frameworks that do the job, of making it better for them. And coming to frameworks, there is a lot of times there is a lot of uniformity in code. So what happens is that your let us say you have a code separated in two files. So a lot of times the code that is written in one file will be similar to the other one when you're working with a framework because you're having a lot of restrictions as mentioned before. But when you're using a library, the uniformity is lost, but it's not necessary that it happens, but a lot of times uniformity has chances of losing. So what I mean to say is that even if you are using same set of libraries, they can be structured in different ways. But when it comes to frameworks, you have better better structure because they all follow almost the same patterns and all that. So these are like prime pros of using frameworks where libraries take a hit. Now let's talk about the libraries end point of view, where libraries have the pros and frameworks are the cons. So when you're using a framework, you have a very big learning curve. So you might have seen a lot of people trying hard to learn AngularJS or React.js or etc. So it takes a lot of time because the code is big when it comes to frameworks, and the structures and the procedures, the prescribed practices are like there are a lot of them. So you do require to open documentation and sit on it for ages to get a complete grasp of it if at all you're pretty new. But when it comes to libraries, you have a comparatively you have a smaller learning curve because the code itself is pretty small first of all to begin with. So you don't have to worry about it much. So you don't have to worry about getting things right because at a first glance you will understand what a library would do, and that is why you can find libraries of various sizes, be it big library like jQuery or other small libraries which exist on GitHub, which do pretty small stuff. So I can't come up with an example right away, but yeah, you can find them a lot. So another thing that I would say is a pro in libraries is that there is very little complexity of the code. So when you're working with a framework, you a lot of times people end up seeing that simple actions which can be done using a library like jQuery is kind of complex when you're doing it with AngularJS. So a lot of people complain about this. So this is something uh, it has to be taken into consideration when deciding whether to go with a framework or a library, because your whoever is developing it, be it you or your team or anyone, they need to learn the framework completely, and they need to understand a lot of things before starting off a framework. But when working with a library, it is pretty easy and useful. The You can share your stuff with pretty much ease. But if at all you have to share your AngularJS code with someone, they would have to understand it. See, the difference is like this. I mean, even though they have to learn both a library and a framework when working with it, it is easier for them to share and work with code, because the complexity involved in a framework is it's generally a lot. But when you talk about a framework, it is sorry, the code complexity with a framework is a lot. I'm sorry, but when working with a library, it is pretty fine. Like, the code complexity is not so much. But since the code complexity is not much, the code quality will decrease. So that is where I was talking about before. The code quality is better in frameworks than in libraries, because you always tend to use the same structures which are prescribed. So this is something related. So anyways, there is something called flexibility when working with frameworks and libraries. So even though AngularJS has a lot of ways to implement a solution, so you have a lot of solutions to the same problem. You can come up with your own, but the flexibility offered by a framework like AngularJS is very low, like when compared to jQuery, because jQuery is like just a set of methods and functions. It doesn't actually restrict you from constructing things of your own. See, of course, all of this is like blurred. So when I say there is a restriction in AngularJS, I don't mean to say that you can't come up with functions or methods or anything of your own choice. But the thing is that uh, what a certain function will do, which is given by AngularJS, so the native functions are themselves restricted. So you can't simply change them. And also, if at all you're using something, it comes with certain restrictions. So if you're using a particular method, and it requires you to submit an optional, sorry, it's not an optional, it requires you to submit a particular parameter in a function, you would have to do that. But when coming to jQuery, you don't have to, because you're starting from scratch and you don't require new methods. Sorry, you won't require you don't have restrictions on the new methods that you come up with. So yeah, and lastly, there are a lot of bugs when frameworks are new. So let us say Angular 4 has come up, so we have a lot of bugs in Angular 4, and people are helpful when they come out and say that these bugs are there, so you need to fix them, which is very much very much appreciated, because people actually do a good job of it. uh, but yeah, the fixing part is like you would have to wait for them to fix it, because framework needs to be understood completely, the construction of it, in order to be able to fix a bug. Because if you're fixing a bug, and if you somehow you destroy the code, or you alter the code working without knowing that this affects something else, it would be pretty dangerous because the framework itself will get destroyed. But when coming to library, the bugs are easier to fix because essentially, as already stated, it is a small code base and you don't have to do much. You need to just pinpoint, you need to just see how a method works, how an implementation works, and you can just go ahead and change it. But that is not the case with frameworks a lot of times. So yeah, that's it, guys. So that's it. So that is what I would say, that these are like some things you need to keep in mind when working with frameworks and libraries. So let us say if at all you're working for a big app, you're constructing an app, I would suggest, with my own experience, that you go for a framework like AngularJS or React, which can streamline processes for you while creating an app. But let us say you're just working for a standalone static website page, which won't require much functionality, but it would require a lot of uh, animation, a lot of dynamic changing, dynamic appearance and disappearance of content, or animations, or stuff like that. For that, what you can do is that you can just go ahead with jQuery and then use other libraries, main libraries, like let us say you have D3JS for doing data visualization. So that itself is a library again. So yeah, you can use such things. So over there, you don't require AngularJS. But yeah, frameworks themselves sometimes end up using different libraries. So AngularJS uses jQuery, so you can use a jQuery Lite version. But yeah, it ends up using a library. So I hope you've understood the primary key decisions that you need to make before deciding what to choose. So you need to decide what you're using the app for. You need to decide whether you would be okay with writing code that is not similar, like one file given by one person is not similar to the other guys. So you need to see, like, if your team is fine with the framework, it has learned it. So stuff like this do matter when you're working for large applications which take like months to build. So it is a better it is better if you sit and decide this for a day before going ahead, because uh, you would be avoiding a lot of problems in the future. So yeah, that's it, guys, for this video. I'll be seeing you guys in another video. So keep watching and like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.